So welcome to tonight's conversation on culturally responsive teaching. I'm Keziah Latour, the Director of Equity and Cultural Responsiveness. The presentation is scheduled from 6 to 7 with 30 minutes allotted at the end for questions. As we look at tonight's presentation, the purpose is twofold. One, it is an opportunity for us to explore the practice of culturally responsive teaching and its meaningful student learning experiences. And then two, it is an opportunity for us to engage. So an opportunity to pretty much have that conversation that's so necessary and needed at this time. So welcome to tonight's culturally responsive teaching session. For those of you just joining us, again, there'll be 30 minutes at the end. So I'm going to highlight what we see here on our agenda. As you look here for tonight, we're going to dive into norms and then explore culture and culturally responsive teaching. We'll look, of course, at the benefits and the practitioner and what that classroom looks like. And then also dive into the importance of relationships and what happens at home, that extension of learning. At the very end of tonight's presentation, we'll have an opportunity, about 30 minutes set aside for those questions. So as we go through tonight's presentation, one recommendation or suggestion I'd like to make is if you have questions or when those questions come up, just to jot them down. You can either record them on a Post-it sheet of paper or somewhere in your Word document and so forth, just so that some of the slides that we're going to see may address the questions, but if it hasn't been answered during the latter portion of this session tonight, you'll have an opportunity to pose those questions and get an answer. All right, so let's begin where we should, and that's with our norms. I'm using Glenn Singleton's norms for courageous conversations. And basically, as you look at them, we start with just the engagement. So during our conversation tonight, I want to welcome you and invite you to stay engaged. Experience discomfort because there may be some new learning or some things that you have questions about, and holding on for that question to the very end can cause some discomfort. So I understand that. Speak your truth because that's important, and expect and accept non-closure. When we look at our norms, this is something in Wissahickon School District that we do as practitioners. So not only are our classroom teachers establishing clear norms, but so are administrators when we're accessing meetings and so forth. The norms are very important because they provide us with a clear indication of how we're going to engage and interact with one another. And it really helps to maintain a healthy and respectful environment for conversations, especially meaningful conversations to occur. So the practice of establishing norms will help us to really identify how to engage in one another with these conversations and how to kind of foster opportunities for every single person to be a part of it. So I will be referencing the norms throughout our session together. Again, it's a practice that's a part of a culture responsive approach. So speaking of practices, as we look at the norms, again, to establish those clear expectations of how we're going to engage in conversations with one another, we also want to ensure that there's opportunity for connection. And so connection before content is something that we do prior to a meeting, prior to a presentation, prior to content. And the essence of it is to really make sure that we are making those connections that are so meaningful so that individuals who are in that space feel that they belong or have an opportunity to really get to know one another. So in your chat that you have in front of you, what I'd like you to do is to take a moment to add which school or schools your children attend. So again, connection before content is something that we do here at Wissahickon School District that is part of a culture responsive practice. And what I like to do is to see who is in space tonight with me. So if you're a parent or guardian, you're here tonight representing your child, please feel free to write down Bluebell, Lower Gwinnett, Shady Grove, Stony Creek, and I look forward to seeing who's here in the chat. So take a moment to do that. For those of you just joining us, welcome to tonight's culturally responsive teaching workshop. At this point, what I'm asking our visitors to do, who are part of our participation in this session, is to just add which school you're coming from in terms of being a parent or guardian for your child. So if we're in Bluebell, Lower Gwinnett, Shady Grove, feel free to use the chat box to note that. Okay, I see we have someone here from the middle school. Anyone here from the high school? Let's see who's here. Bluebell, perfect. Parent or guardian, other areas. Okay, there we go. High school, excellent. Who else do we have tonight? Okay, good. Middle school parent, middle school, high school. Okay, a lot of high school parents here tonight. Excellent. Guardians are here from high school. Who else do we have in the house? Uh-oh, there goes Shady Grove. Perfect. Okay, Bluebell, middle school, high school, Shady Grove, Stony. Okay, middle school, high school. Excellent, excellent. Okay, good. Keep it coming. It's really important for us to know who's in this space with us. It's an excellent opportunity to make that connection, to also foster community. And so as we continue, and again, please feel free to continue in the chat box, letting me know who you're here, who's here. We're going to go into a question. So the question that I have in front of us is, what is culture? And we're still going to use our chat to list what is culture. But before we do, just want to kind of set up a parameter. When we're talking about culturally responsive teaching, we can't do so without exploring culture. And so as we looked at our norms and we talked about how we're going to engage this evening, and also as we look through the agenda, we know that this is going in the direction of where we want to be in terms of a better understanding of culture responsive teaching and that culture responsive practitioner. So what I like to dive into first is your understanding of culture. And based on our perspectives, our positionality, our definition of culture may be very different. And so take a moment to process what connotations or denotations come to mind when you think of culture. And once you have an idea of something you want to state about culture or share, I want you to place it in the chat, but don't hit enter. So for example, if I'm writing it, it's going to take me a while. So I'm saying culture is, right? And someone else will have it very quickly. So I want to give that time for individuals to really process what culture is. So take a moment, there's no rush here. Write down what you believe and enter it in terms of culture as your understanding. And then when I say set, we'll release it so we all can see those different understandings of culture. Okay, so I'm going to open the chat here. On your own, just begin to process what is culture. And then once you have a concept, an idea, that denotation or connotation in mind, I'd like you to place it in the chat. And in about 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to release it so we can see how you have come to know and learn about culture, because that's important. Okay, about 20 seconds there. Welcome for those of you joining us. We are looking at the question, what is culture? What connotations and denotations come to mind when we talk of culture? Okay, 10 seconds there. Okay, feel free at this time to hit enter. Again, there are no wrong or right answers here. It's really our understanding of what culture is. What does it denote, right? So I see culture denotes a person's traditions, behaviors, way of speaking that connects them to a like group. What else do we have for culture? What else comes to your mind when we're thinking of culture? What other associations do you think of when we're talking about someone's culture? Traditions, values, religious beliefs, they contribute to your identity. Absolutely. Way of speaking connects them to like group. Okay, what else do we have here? Take a moment to continue to add, what is culture? Again, no right or wrong answers, but it helps us to move forward in terms of our understanding of what culture is. So as you look here, again, on this slide, there are further ideas, concepts, denotations, and connotations that come to mind when we're speaking of culture. It is truly how we perceive our social environment, right? It is also those cultural values and preferences that we have, what we appreciate and value. When we're looking at culture, it also entails that individualism, right? Some cultures focus on that autonomy. Others, they come from that collectivism. And so they're focusing on the group, and the groups is important to that individual. So the individual is contributing to that group at whole. That's also part of culture. So as we look at understanding and valuing the cultures of our students, we really have to understand what culture is to begin with. As we go through different classrooms, the classrooms have cultures. Our school has a culture. From one district to another district, we see different cultural changes and cultural shifts. So our knowledge and understanding of culture is important because it helps to foster that cross-cultural communication that we'll engage in, that meaning making, that empathy, that understanding that comes through and with the work that we're going to be doing. And that's here in our space, that learning that takes place that's so valuable for the success of our learners. So this visual is just that. It's a visual of the cultural iceberg that helps to highlight that there are certain aspects of culture that are quite visible, so we can see them, like age. There are some that are less visible, so we can see something like family traditions, but there are some that are not visible to us, those personal values, those personal beliefs, and so forth. And so the assumptions that we make are not visible cultural attributes or cultural things that we see, but they're there. And those cultural assumptions or cultural beliefs or personal beliefs and so forth, they do foster and frame how we engage with others and how we perceive them. And so that's really important for an educator, and especially a culturally responsive practitioner, in their engagement of learners. So looking at this slide, I'll move this over. Here, you can see several key concepts and definitions that go along with what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher, or what it means to focus on culturally responsive teaching. It is a pedagogy, and it is evidence-based, and that research-based approach to teaching is one that is sound, in that the thrust of it too is in connecting students' cultures, languages, and life experiences with what they learn in school. And so it is the importance of activating students' prior knowledge and understanding to what they're currently learning, that new learning. And that's really important because it's that activation of prior knowledge that helps them to really accept and understand that new learning that's coming into play. So as we focus on an effective teacher, a teacher who is also a reflective teacher, a teacher who's culturally responsive, we know that they're being very mindful about that prior knowledge and the connection to new learning. And so they're diving into learning about their students and those cultural identities. There are many benefits of culturally responsive teaching. The most important one that is essential for us as we go through our understanding of what happens in a culturally responsive classroom is that there are high expectations for students. It is about making sure that we optimize the student learning experience. And with that, that means that we are fostering belongingness. The students who come into the classroom, they are cognizant of the norms that are established. They understand the value that they bring to the learning environment. They understand that that person who is instructing them is capitalizing on their strengths and their experiences. That person who's in the classroom is cognizant that they come in with knowledge and understanding, and they're building upon that. And so as we look at how we approach students and how we're seeing them through that strengths-based, or what's called that asset-based mindset, it's essential because we want to really drive home that success story of that student. And we do that through cultivating those student-centered and student-engaged classroom approaches, and ensuring that it's inclusive. And so as you look at this slide, you'll see that, the affirmation of students in the classroom is key. We want them to belong. We want them to know we see them. We want them to know that what they bring to the classroom matters, and then help to nurture that and help to develop that is key. So the next slide here focuses on the culturally responsive practitioner. And before I go into covering a couple of things about this, I just want to reiterate for those of you who are joining us, number one, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here this evening. I know it's gorgeous out, but you're here, and I'm so happy about that. The other piece is there will be opportunity for questions. So as I'm going through the different slides, I know that I'm speaking a great deal just to provide that information, but this session is twofold. There will be opportunities at the end, about 30 minutes that is allotted for those questions. So as I go through the different slides, please feel free to write down your questions and keep them to the end. I'm hopeful that some of the slides that come up will address your questions, but if they don't, then feel free to know that at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to pose those questions. All right, so looking at this particular slide on the culturally responsive practitioner, I highlighted 3 keywords: mindful, present, and reflective. As we're looking at being culturally responsive to our students, we really need to know and understand who they are and what they bring. And so it's vital that we are really activating students' lived experiences. We're bringing them into the classroom. We're having those meaningful and authentic conversations. And we're present with them, and that requires our being flexible, being understanding, being knowledgeable. This practitioner is one who knows their craft, right? So when you're coming into this space, this is a person who is an expert in their field. And with that knowledge and understanding of their craft, that content, the other layer is then the awareness and knowledge of the diversity of the students in the classroom. We come in learning differently. We come in with different backgrounds and learning experiences and cultural understandings. And so to remove those barriers that can sometimes impede learning and opportunity, that practitioner is very intentional in ensuring that they're connecting with the students and having those students connect that prior knowledge with their new knowledge going forward. So this is something that's really essential. It is valuable in a sense that we don't expect Wissahickon school teachers to go and do this without professional learning. So throughout the course of this year and last year, we have been very intentional in ensuring that that professional learning is happening, right? We know that that competence is really important to secure the confidence in the classroom to engage in such a way. So we want to make sure that we're intentional in our professional learning opportunities and that there's opportunities for growth as we continue through the course of what we're doing. And this is something that's going to be ongoing. So since we want our students to experience those success stories and achievement, part of that is always reflecting and continually learning. So in this slide, again, we're highlighting some aspects of the culturally responsive practitioner. You can see here, we're always asking how can we, through our instruction, authentically engage our students. And so that self-reflection is really important. We're also active and mindful of checking our own implicit biases, which we all have. And so that's something that is necessary for us to be mindful of. So if I have students in front of me in the classroom, those implicit biases, whatever they are, can get in the way of how I interact with a student. And because they're implicit, they may be a little bit challenging. So I'm going to explain that a little bit more for you. Practices social emotional awareness and then maintains an inquiry stance regarding the impact of our interactions on students. So with the social and emotional aspect, when we're looking at self-awareness, we're helping students to build that self-confidence, self-efficacy, and help to, recognize their strengths. So as we have students coming in from kindergarten on, that's what we want for all students. We really want them to capitalize on their strengths and define their identity. When we're looking at the social awareness, and we are cognizant that our students are going to exist and they are existing in a global society, a global world, we want them to have the ability to have that perspective taken, to empathize, to respect others, and when we're looking at responsible decision making, which is another social and emotional skill set, the competencies that we're talking about, we're helping them to identify problems, but also solve them, right? And be able to evaluate them critically. So it's really building that capacity, that cognitive capacity that's valuable for our students. In terms of another social emotional competency that culturally responsive practitioner is in touch with is also self-management, helping students to have that self-discipline, the goal setting, the organizational skills, and then the relationship skills that are really important to engage in those types of collaborative works that are so essential to learning. So that communication, that teamwork is beneficial. So I wanted to come back to biases, just in case. So with biases, we are talking about both explicit and implicit. Again, explicit biases, they're intentional. We are very much aware of those biases that we have, right? And so when we're looking at that, those are things that pretty much I know what I want here or how I think or feel about a certain thing. Implicit biases, however, are a little trickier because they're unconscious. And so that association may be a little harder for that individual, of course, to discern. And that's why that professional learning comes into place. And that's why that reflection is very critical. And so as an example, ageism, right? There could be someone, or could be, let's speak from here, I could be someone who thinks that because this person's an older person, they're not able to do their job. And, that may be an implicit bias that I have and not be aware of, and yet it's affecting those individuals that I'm choosing to work on my team. So when we're beginning to look at these biases in classroom learning, it is important because we want to make sure that we're not showing favor to someone else or missing someone else in their interim, right? So we may say we're in a science and math class and our questions may be geared toward, of course, certain male students in that classroom. Well, what about that female student that's in the classroom too? So we want to make sure, again, that we are cognizant, aware, self-aware, in case those biases surface, so that we do not cause any barriers to arise to students' learning, which of course will impact that success story that we're trying to have toward that student achievement. So through professional learning, that's something that has been ongoing. That's self and internal work. So when we look here at the importance of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors, I like to always give credit to Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. And with this idea that I really like is the whole concept of, having that window so that you can experience the world, like it's taking you somewhere beyond where you are. As a child, I was an avid reader. Even this summer, I would go to the library to get tons of books. And what it did for me was that it provided me with opportunity to look at windows, to see other worlds and learn about different people. Of course, I became an English teacher and I'm still an avid reader and I enjoy literature. When we look at something in terms of a sliding door, it is really walking through and being in that world. And so as you dive into that literature, it's almost like you're transported to different places. And that's important for students in the acquisition of their knowledge and understanding. And then, of course, we can't forget the importance of mirrors, like seeing ourselves. But there is someone who's had the success story or someone who's done this invention, and guess what? They look like me. And so that's really important if we're true to building the cognitive capacity of every student and building the identity of every learner. So I wanted to make sure that that's something that we highlight for that culturally responsive practitioner. So for those of you who have signed on and joined us, thank you so much. I'm glad that you're here this evening. There are questions, about 30 minutes at the end for questions. So if you're just joining, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted that. So as we go through the slides, if you have any questions, feel free to jot them down. And I'm hopeful that either the slides will address them or at the end, I'll be able to address the questions that you have. So thank you for joining us. So in the culturally responsive classroom, what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing all the things that you see here on the slide. It allows students to really experience productive struggle. They're engaging in opportunities to think creatively and critically. And again, you have formative assessments and so forth in the curriculum for them to receive that immediate feedback about how they're doing in terms of their progress, their student learning. What else is important is the opportunity to dive into metacognitive thought, right? So our students are thinking about their thinking. They're being critical thinkers. They're evaluating their learning. They're learning together. And so we want this experience for every single learner. And so that culture responsive practitioner is really looking at, what are my students' strengths? How can I build upon those strengths? What are their interests? How can I build upon those interests? And how can I share with them all these things that will help to enrich them as they continue to pursue those goals and those interests? And how, if I'm teaching this subject, can I make it make sense to the student, right? How do I connect it to them so they understand what it is that I'm so passionate about in my craft? And so here, as we dive into the importance of relationships, I spoke of the classroom, that culturally responsive classroom and that culturally responsive practitioner, and all the ways that they're coming in with that competence in terms of knowing their content, being experts in that area. And then, of course, being intentional in being culturally responsive to the students who are in front of them. And so as we go forward, the importance of relationships is something that is key to us. And again, we look at our parents and guardians. We value you. We welcome your input, your feedback, your collaboration. That partnership is key. And so as we look forward to what we can do as parents for this culturally responsive teacher, that relationship or that understanding, share, right? That's something, share what you know and understand about your child, because that's very beneficial to that culturally responsive practitioner. If you know and understand this is a great way to reach your child, sharing that also helps that culturally responsive teacher in the classroom. Form relationships, collaborate, ask questions, don't be hesitant to ask, continue to advocate, continue to express your ideas, because it truly is a partnership. It truly is that village that will help us to ensure that the students are receiving the learning that they need, and also developing the strengths that they need to going forward in a successful stories that we're looking for each of our learners in Wissahickon School District. So, extension of learning at home. I know that many of you came here tonight probably to see what is culturally responsive teaching, and then what can I do at home for my child? I think as we look at this very carefully, exploring identity is so essential. That self-awareness, being very confident in who I am, being able to, develop my identity and redefine who I am at any point. And I think that's really important as they grow in interest, wanting to be a doctor, a teacher, and so forth. So those things are really important for students. What's important here too, as you go forward, is just ensuring that, there's opportunity for discussion and perspective taking. Storytelling, whether it's you're telling stories or reading stories, is so essential and so beneficial. It helps to foster empathy and understanding, and also building your child's agency and voice, letting them know you can advocate for yourself. Here's how to do that. And then leveraging literature at home to help them to understand and identify what are the problems in this story, right? And then how would you solve it? Because it really engages them in that critical thinking of, okay, here's the problem, but here are some solutions, here are some possibilities. And then, of course, encouraging that appreciation of diversity and opportunities for them to think critically and creatively. And again, always cultivating opportunities for collaboration and learning about self and others. So those are things that can continue to happen at home. So at this point, I've been talking a while because I wanted to, again, make sure that there was some information about what is culturally responsive teaching, and understanding that there's professional learning that goes with it, and then to understand the benefits. So at home, what I like to do now, thinking about the whole concept of extension of this learning at home, I want you to look at this list that's in front of you. I'm going to give you 2 questions to focus on. And the 2 questions actually provide voice and choice. And so I'm going to use the slide in a moment to share with you, but I want you just to look at what's here first in terms of exploring identity, self-awareness, etc. Go back. Now, on the next slide here, these are the 2 questions that I'm going to pose. What are some things that you do already, right? So I gave that list and you're probably like, I do that. I own that. That's me. And then what are some new things perhaps that came up that you actually can do? So again, what are some things that you already do? And what are some new things that you can do? And for this one, what I like to do is actually provide a breakout session where you'll be in a space with others. And so before we dive into that at this point, I just want to reiterate the norms. So for those of you who just joined us at the very beginning of our session, I established it with norms, which is a part of what we do in Wissahickon School District, whether we're in the classroom or in meetings. We establish norms to really make clear the expectations of how we're going to engage with one another. And so one thing I just said was stay engaged. I know it's gorgeous out, but I'm glad that you're here. Experience discomfort. Sometimes we have a question and we want an immediate answer. At the end, we'll have the 30-minute break where we can definitely dive into those questions. Speak your truth, and then expect and accept non-closure. And to that point, it is, you may have great questions. I may not have all the answers tonight, but I will write those questions down and return with an answer for you. So just wanted to make sure we highlighted the norms again before we go into our breakout session. So again, we're looking at 2 questions, but you will be able to choose one. And so giving students a choice is important. So you have, obviously, as a person who's in the classroom as a culturally responsive practitioner, you know and understand the intent behind your lesson. Providing students with choice, the opportunity, again, helps to build that student agency and allows for that creative lens that you want them to pretty much embark in or employ as they're exploring their learning. So look at the 2 questions here and decide which one you would like to explore in your breakout session. So I'm going to give you a moment to look at the 2 questions before we go into our breakout sessions.
Can I ask a question?
So,
Excuse me, can I ask a question before you do that?
Yes, is it pertaining to the questions here?
Yes, because I don't think this is what a lot of us were expecting. We thought we were going to have a group conversation. Breakout sessions are more of like a training thing. So if we're not going to be able to ask questions of the group and of you, it's not really helpful.
Thank you for that question, Katie. So for clarification, we are going to definitely have an opportunity for questions, so that dialogue to take place. The first thing we're going to do is to do a breakout session in a smaller group. And then this presentation will conclude shortly, and there will be an opportunity for questions. So I think perhaps you may have missed the opening agenda, but there's 30 minutes allotted. And I think based on our presentation, we may have a little bit more than 30 minutes to engage in that conversation of questioning. Okay. So to that point, at this time, what I like to do is provide that opportunity for us to dive into our breakout sessions with those questions in mind. One is, what are some things you already do? And what are some new things that you can do? And these questions, again, are relative to this idea of what we can do at home to extend that learning. All right, so at this point, what we're going to do is dive into those breakout sessions. We'll have about 5 to 7 minutes in our breakout group with our colleagues, and then we'll hear from you. Okay, welcome back from the breakout rooms. I hope that it was an opportunity for you to think about how we can extend some of this learning at home in terms of culture responsive teaching. For those of you who are joining us, as I said at the very beginning, there would be that presentation time and then time allocated for questions at the end. So looking here at where we are in terms of things that we're doing at home or things that we can do differently, do we have anyone? Let's kind of start with that first question. Is anyone able to or willing to share about what are some things that you already do at home to extend that learning, to partner with our teachers?
I'll share.
Okay, thank you.
So what we try to do in our house is to embrace other cultures. So for instance, on February 1st was the Lunar New Year, and we had a little small celebration, in our house, even though it is a holiday celebrated in the Asian culture, and that is not our culture. We still were able to get the red envelopes, and put something special in them, and just celebrate that holiday in our family and lifting up that culture. Same with St. Patrick's Day, and same with Diwali, which is a holiday celebrated in India. So we try to be aware of other cultures and their special important days, and do a little something to highlight those days and respect those days in our home. Likewise, when another community is hurting due to an injustice that has occurred, we talk about it not only in the African American community, which is the culture that we identify with, but we also speak about the injustice and find ways to support the community group, no matter who it is. So we do a lot of conversating and trying to make sure that if they're, trying to make sure that we purposely seek out small ways and, some large ways to celebrate other cultures and to connect with other cultures outside of our own.
Thank you for sharing, Lena. I really appreciate that. The second question that we had were, what are some new things that you can do? So do we have someone who would unmute and kind of just share something new that you can do? Okay, well, I'm going to go forward then. It seems like we already do a lot of this stuff then. So looking at our next slide, I just want to make sure to highlight for you some of our upcoming community conversation workshop series. For those of you who joined us, I was pretty clear at the very beginning the nature of the workshop, that at the first onset of it, the very beginning, it would be informative. So that would be the opportunity for us to really understand culturally responsive teaching and its implications for student learning. And then the second would be the opportunity to really engage in conversation, to ask those valuable questions that you have. So I don't want to disappoint, and I want to make sure that you are cognizant that that will be something that we are going to actually embark in shortly. For our series next Wednesday, we're going to look at social emotional learning. So that's going to be April 6th from 6 to 7. We will look at sense of belonging, which gives us an opportunity to also look at the belonging climate survey results. We know that there's a direct correlation between belonging and our students' ways of achieving and kind of closing that opportunity gap that persists. The other that we're going to look at is the workshop on importance of language and mindset. It will be an opportunity for us to look again at biases that we were talking about, but also exploring more that asset-based mindset and how valuable it is in the classroom. With restorative practice, that comes up May 4th. And so that's a workshop that I hope many of you will join and be a part of. Okay, so at this time, there will be an opportunity for us to engage in questions. What I'm going to do first is to make sure that I stop sharing my screen. So let me do that.
Before you do that, could you go back 2 slides to your last question? What do you do, and what the one before this one?
Okay, gotcha. Let me move this out of your way here.
Great.
What are some new things?
Yeah, I would love to speak on this. I was just giving some time for anyone else to join in, but some new things that I do feel I could do, and we all could do, is really to be more inclusive and to be more welcoming. So for example, I was attending, my husband was attending a sports event in the community, local sports event. Our child was part of a group, and when he got there, we were the only diverse family of color in the room. And so it can be very intimidating and uncomfortable being the only or the other. But there was a father there that walked around and shook the hand of every father in the room, and how welcoming that was. And how, when my husband came home to talk about the event and how uncomfortable he felt initially being in the room, and just how at ease he felt with this one father who decided to just greet and just say hello. And we don't even know his name, but he was so welcoming on just that one aspect. Now, the coaches in the room could have, taken that same step, but that's not what happened. It was a father. And so I think some things that we can do is we can all be more welcoming, and we can teach our children to be more welcoming. I mean, so often I talk to my kids about being not being too self-conscious, being the only African American in a class or in a room or in a group or on a sports team, but looking for those opportunities to be welcoming. And I think that if we would all look for those opportunities, this to me is the most important part of your presentation, and this is the heart of it, but this is where we're least talking right now, and it's where we can all have a part in doing more to be more welcoming, because when you're talking about culture responsive teaching and or just being a more culturally sensitive or a culturally aware practitioner as a citizen or a teacher, and parents or teachers too, this is where we all can have a voice, and that is to be more welcoming in our everyday conversations, spaces, little leagues, Girl Scout meetings. You know, these are the moments where we can be more welcoming. So I just wanted to share that. I didn't want to see us skip over this slide because I think it's so important to look at how are we welcoming other folks that engage in our spaces outside of the school setting and inside the school setting, and how are we teaching our children to be more receptive and welcoming to children who are either minority in a group or maybe have different abilities and maybe feeling not as included as they could be. So just wanted to share that.
I appreciate that, Lena. Thank you so much for it. I really do. I'm going to stop the share here so that we can see one another. Part of this is also the opportunity. I know that some people had to leave, and what I like to do before everyone leaves is to make sure that I provide you with the link to our survey. It's our parent guardian survey for this workshop series. And as I stated that, in terms of being a culture responsive teacher or culture responsive practitioner, we need to be reflective. And so the survey in itself provides me with insight and information from you that's valuable, because this is the first workshop session that I'm engaged in Wissahickon School District. Again, as many of you know, I'm new to the district. So it's valuable for me to gain insight and also grow in this area, because our next session is next week. And so your feedback is invaluable. And again, something that I say to the partnership is that we really need to work together, be in collaboration and in partnership, and help in the plight that we have together. And that's making sure that our students have those valuable success stories that we're looking for. So at this time, the survey is there in the chat box for anyone who has to leave. Please feel free to access it. But this is the open session opportunity for you to engage in conversation with me. So I look forward to addressing questions that you have. Before we dive into those questions, I also want to reiterate some important points regarding our norms, especially for some of you who are just joining. The first thing is stay engaged. So I know there will be several questions. Please just stay engaged during that time. Experience discomfort. Because there may not be an answer that I have for your question. That might be something that is off-putting and you want an immediate answer. Speak your truth, because that's important and it's power, and it helps me to gain knowledge and understanding of our culture here. And then expect and accept non-closure. That speaks again to the fact that we may not have all the answers today in this session, but I'm writing it down. I also have your name here, so I'll reach out so I can give you that answer. That's something that I'm committed to. So at this point, please feel free to, if you want to, just, stop, show your, if you can, just show me who you are so I can see you. I'm seeing a lot of names, and that's great. And if you prefer to stay that way, that's fine. But let's start with some questions. You can also place, if you don't want to unmute and just ask those questions directly. You know, we've been using the chat all evening, so feel free to place your question in the chat. So I saw someone was encouraged by a conversation they had. Tanya Bridges, that was great. Nima said, agree with Nicole. Thank you, Lena. Welcoming goes hand in hand with empathy. Awesome. Again, we're getting powerful messages here, what we can do and model at home. What questions do you have? Don't be shy. Carrie.
Hi, I'm actually just wondering how culturally responsive teaching is different from just like basic good teaching strategies, like building on prior experience, scaffolding, teacher reflecting after a lesson, you know, engaging, affirming students when they've succeeded. A lot of what I'm also a high school English teacher, was in San Diego. And so a lot of what you said, I'm like, this is exactly what it just wasn't called culturally responsive teaching. So what is different or new about culturally responsive teaching that sets it apart? Or is it just continue to the same kind of good teaching practices?
So that's an excellent question, Carrie. Number one, I love that you're saying it's good teaching practice, and it is. And I'm also happy that you connected it to what we do as teachers and have been doing as teachers. The difference is there is an intentional reflection, an intentional connection to an awareness of our students' cultural backgrounds. Like there's that cultural awareness. And that's important as we are looking at the cultural and ethnic identities of our students in the classroom, because the work that we do is meaningful and we want to ensure that there are no barriers in terms of cultural understandings. And so it really gives us a wider lens of how we're approaching every learner in our space. And so there is that culturally aspect of it, that cultural responsive aspect of it that we're looking at, Carrie, to ensure that we're building the cognitive capacity of students that we found in the research that have been more dependent learners. And so it's really helping them to become those independent thinkers and independent learners. And it starts with being intentional in what we're teaching, being intentional and aware of, do we have biases coming up? And so, you know, being a teacher, you know, I had the opportunity to teach for 24 years. And 22 of those years were, of course, in Cheltenham School District. And during that time, I did a lot of what you said, Carrie, in terms of those best practices. Something else that was intentional and needed, of course, was looking at what our students are bringing into the classroom. What are their cultural identities, their ethnic identities? What is presenting these barriers here to learning? And so it was more of that reflective piece when we dive into culture responsive teaching. So I love that you asked that question. But really we have to put out front that it is looking very carefully at our own biases, doing internal work, being mindful of the students that are in front of us, and looking at the cultural and ethnic identities of our students and showing value to that. And being aware of the fact that not everyone learns the same way. So that goes back into understanding there are ideas of culture that highlights the individualism and the ideas of culture that will highlight collectivism. And so as we are doing instruction, we know to navigate the learning opportunities and experiences for our students by being intentional in how we plan things. Nima.
Hi there. So I did join late, so forgive me if this was covered and I can get with you one-on-one to not take up everyone's time. But when you refer to culturally responsive teaching, how is that, like, are the teachers getting trained for this? Is it across all levels? Oh, okay. Are you telling me to reach out? Oh,
no, there was a question,
okay.
Nima.
Okay, yeah. So just, is it being applied at every age, all classrooms? Is there like a consistent like training or something like that? And then how do you measure success? Like, are we assessing like where teachers are? And then in a year we'll see, oh, they're better at this or not?
Excellent question. So to your point about where we are, that, oh, and one thing, Nima, that's really important. This is recorded, so whatever you've missed, you'll be able to see again. So this is district-wide, and our staff members are receiving professional learning opportunities. So, everyone, so when we're looking at our administrative team, there is that equity leadership learning sessions and train with trainer sessions that are actually taking place. With our staff, there is that culturally responsive professional learning opportunity that's taking place too. So we're engaging in a common understanding, common knowledge, common language, so that when our students enter Wissahickon School District, when we talk about it being one WIS, it is that understanding that we are building the success stories for every learner. And this is what we value here in our district. And this is how we support our diverse families, right? Our diverse communities that make up one WIS and make us so enriching and strong as a district. And then I want to go to your last question. How do we know we've been successful? So we have been looking at the data. And so with our current data in terms of where we are with our disproportionality, sometimes in the discipline, in students who are accessing honors and AP, or in the achievement gap that exists in our district, right? We're very clear and very transparent on these are things that we've identified. We're working deliberately and intentionally to address that. So success would be that we're seeing changes and shifts here. Like we're seeing more students of color entering into those honors and AP classes. We're seeing our students succeed at every level, in terms of their testing or in terms of what they're doing, in terms of our discipline. We're employing restorative practices. We're revising our code of conduct. So those disproportionalities that we're seeing, they're not there. Again, if we're one nation, one WIS, right? We want to make sure that we're addressing those areas.
Is that just one quick follow-up? Is that something we've seen any movement in, recently, or are we kind of saying, okay, we're really focusing on this now and let's measure going forward?
Yes, I think and again, Nima, I'll speak to it. Being here for the past maybe 6 months now, I can speak to what we've been doing, but no, it's something that we really are going to look at very carefully in terms of the movement. Are we seeing that gap or anything is closing? No, not yet. But the commitment to the work that we're doing is ongoing. And so we will begin to, and that is the hope of what we're doing, begin to see those shifts and those changes. And that comes with the consistency. It comes with approach because we employ multi-tiered systems of support, right? So how we're actualizing equity and so forth in terms of our responses to student needs, the intervention, forth. So as we can and place some of those disparities that we have.
Ms. Latour, if you can hear me, there was some glitches in your response. We got the gist of what you were saying, but it did pause for a good maybe 15 seconds there.
Oh my gosh, I was glitching. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was just me, but I think it's just at the tail end.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So again, one thing that's really important, and I see here, let's see who's jumping in here. I have someone that commented like culturally responsive teaching means absolutely doing that internal work, absolutely, and engaging those conversations. And that's something that, our teachers are receiving that professional learning in, like, how do I engage in those courageous conversations? What do they look like? And so those are the things that they're definitely gaining in terms of that professional learning experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's go to, I see there's a question here. Isn't this a community conversation? Absolutely. So let's see what question what is the forum for us to talk about? Okay, concerns with, so in terms of the concerns that you might have with culturally responsive teaching, I welcome them. So what questions do you have?
Hi, so I'm at a sporting event, so this is a little difficult for me to speak. You may hear a lot of background noise. But one of the questions I had was, what emphasis will continue to be placed on teaching our children to be critical thinkers and independent thinkers, when it sounds like one of, actually several of the focus points are on inclusivity and equity and really putting everyone on the same plane? That and it also, you know, the concerning part is it sounds like a lot of groupthink. So my understanding of education, that it was always to be teaching our children how to think, not what to think.
Yes, and to your point, Katie, that's actually what I said. We want our students to be critical thinkers. We want them to be creative, innovative. We want them to evaluate what's being said. And so when we're looking at the lens of the competencies that we're employing in terms of social emotional learning, as well as being, in terms of that culture responsive approach, it is to harness the strengths of our students. And it is also, when we go to education, I want to go back to what Carrie was saying, like, this is great practice or best practice. Education has always been responsive. It has always been culturally responsive. But again, the question is, to what culture, right? What are we doing? And so this culture responsive is just making sure that we're including all, right? And that means that we have many independent learners. And that's the whole point. It's to build that cognitive capacity so that we don't have dependent learners, but those independent learners, Katie, that you're talking about, that's what we want for our students. And we want them to achieve and we want them to be successful. And definitely, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, they need to be critical and creative thinkers. When I was in the classroom as an English teacher for the 24 years that I was blessed to be in the classroom as a teacher, that's something that I wanted from every single student that I had. I wanted them to think, to create, to innovate, to collaborate, to see their values, to see their strengths, and to also know that what they were bringing to the table was of value and meant something and defined how we moved forward. And so as a culturally responsive practitioner, that's exactly what we're doing in the classroom, and we're being very mindful that there's nothing that's coming in to shortchange that experience for our learners, right? To present barriers. So that's chief. So to your point, Katie, that's exactly what we want. We want them to be creative, innovative, collaborative, insightful, right? Because they're the hope of our future. And that's what we're looking for with our district. Every child that comes in is of value to us. And when they graduate, that's excellent for us. We want to see that excellence go forward and do great things in the world because they are going to be global citizens. Other questions?
I think I'm more concerned with the assumptions that are made about a student's culture when we're employing a culturally responsive teaching technique. It sort of implies that the teacher in our system has that expertise to understand each student's culture. And I'm not confident that we have that as a school system, not here or anywhere. So I think those assumptions can be dangerous. That's the concern, is that when an educator in a classroom with a student over a period of months attempts to glean and attempts to understand what a student's culture might be, that's almost a distraction, I think. I would suspect that the socioeconomic factors are far more important than thinking about making assumptions about a student's culture. They're certainly more obvious. And I didn't hear anything that addresses that concern, and I think the assumptions that we can make sometimes there, and if we act incorrectly on those, can maybe do more harm than good. So, maybe you could speak to our district's level of expertise in sort of evaluating and speaking specifically to cultures, because there's, there's not just two, right? So it's a big challenge.
So I think to your point, one thing that we have to be very aware of is that we're not making those assumptions. And, you're right, I'm going to say JV because that's what I see on the screen, right JV in the sense that, we can't assume that with our interaction with that student over a couple of months, that we have that grand understanding of that student's culture, nor can we use that then as a sweeping template for all students from that culture. I think the one thing that you brought in terms of the socioeconomic status of someone in the classroom, that too is a culture that we can't make assumptions over and that we have to be mindful of when engaging students. Like, what does that mean? Do we have biases, whether they're implicit biases that are surfacing because we are cognizant of this student's background? Or do we see the strengths of that student in that classroom piece? And so to your point about, being a culturally responsive teacher, our work is really in making sure that we are building that community and having a sense of belonging for students so that when they come into those spaces, we can really capitalize on their lived experiences. So we're learning from them. There's not the assumption driving the education, but are leaning into inquiry and learning from the students and being reflective as a practitioner. So I think that's really important as we dive into it. We have to continually be in an inquiry stance when working with students. And it is reciprocal in that nature. And the other piece to that too is that we have to be mindful of, the fact that this is something that is ongoing, in terms of the expertise. We will be in professional learning for culture responsive teaching continually, because as a reflective practitioner, this is ongoing learning. So it's never to a finish line or we've reached the goal and that's it and I got it all. There's a cultural humility that is very present in our knowledge and understanding of the diverse individuals that come in and out of our classroom on a daily basis. And so we have to be aware of that. And we also have to make sure that the curriculum that we are providing to our students provides those mirrors that we talked about earlier. We talked about those windows and those mirrors and those sliding doors. That representation is key there. So we want to make sure that as practitioners, we are cognizant of that. But yes, we're not basing that on, I assume, and the assumptions, but yes, evidence-based, looking at our professional learning through an ongoing stance and concerning all those factors that you raised.
Well, thank you for addressing my question.
Of course. Want to make sure I go into the chat. So we have something from one of our participants. We have to remember that it is critically important that students see themselves in the classroom and in their curriculum. Representation matters. Much of a person's culture is not visible. Yes, going back to the iceberg. So we have to learn from our students and families in order to best meet their needs. Excellent point. So again, in partnership, this is something that we want to be, we want our families, we want you to feel that you belong, and we want you to feel that you can ask these questions and that you can help us in terms of what we're doing. We welcome the suggestions, we welcome your input. This is something where we're all learning together too, in terms of our relationship and how that's going to work moving forward. And so, in terms of tonight, I wanted to be very transparent about what it is that we're learning and why it is something that we're learning and how it benefits all our students. Okay, Sandy.
So I hear what you're saying and I understand, I do, but I guess what I am trying to wrap my head around is from a practical standpoint. When you say, we identify these things and we want to make kids belong, and I'm of course all for that. I would never want anyone to not feel like they belong, or, and I do think a sense of belonging is important. They take ownership and they're invested in their school. And I totally agree. But I mean, from a practical standpoint, from a teacher to a student in a classroom setting, and I mentioned this in the breakout room when we had it, is that how does that look practically if you're teaching algebra 2? How is that going to impact in a negative way if we're just taking a step back from teaching to now address all of the cultural, I guess I don't see culture playing a role in things, in everything, with regards to one in a classroom setting. Now, of course, your culture and how you learn, all of that has an impact, but how does that affect all the students at once? And is there going to be a step back from teaching to address the cultural needs in the classroom setting? Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm getting my point across?
Yes, it's very clear, Sandy. No, you're clear. It's a great question. So, when we think of culturally responsive teaching, and this is the truth too, that I see a parallel with social emotional learning. Oftentimes it's seen as something on the side or something in addition to what we're doing in terms of the content. So if I'm a math teacher in the classroom, how am I being culturally responsive? Well, how am I connecting with my students? Have I established norms? Am I providing opportunities for my students to share their lived experiences or build upon their strengths in the classroom, problem solve, identify those problems, collaborate? So it's just different ways. It's not so much that you are stepping aside from your high expectations. The high expectations are there, and they're there for every single child that's in that classroom. And you are meeting their needs. And you're seeing them from a strength-based approach. And that means that what does every child bring into this math class? And what is the culture of being a mathematician, right? And who are the diverse mathematicians and what are their contributions as they come up naturally in our subject area? So that perspective and that holistic approach is valuable for every single student that's there. And also giving them voice and choice is being culturally responsive. So if we have 4 problems here, hey, I want you to target those 2 out there. That's still being a culturally responsive practitioner, especially with my aim in building those students' cognitive capacity. What do I want them to know? What do I want them to understand? What do I want them to be able to do? Am I capitalizing on that through that cognitive capacity? In the science classroom, it's the same. Like, what is the culture of being a scientist? How does the environment show up in different aspects of culture in society, right? In communities, like there are different things that we do that naturally connect to our student lives, but that doesn't mean that we are slowing down the curriculum, lowering expectations, or changing or shifting the trajectory of what we're doing. We're actually being expansive in terms of our scope of looking at the work. And that's important because it is a diversity. And it's that inclusivity that makes us what we are today in terms of Wissahickon School District, in terms of, being an American. So that rich dialogue is really important in every classroom. Problem solving, collaboration, project-based learning. Those are all being culturally responsive and they're naturally connected to the curriculum. Okay, I'll take another question. I see hands that are still up. Carrie, Sandy, don't know if I answered your question or you have another question to follow up.
Yeah, I do. I have another one. I was just wondering if you maybe could mention if there's evidence that or research that has been done on how this I guess program or somewhat new way of doing things with the reflection and implicit bias and how that translates into increased success in education, what that research is, and then also where that originated, that idea of doing that implicit bias reflection.
Yeah, so Carrie, great question. Number one, this is not, when we're talking about culture responsive teaching, it's not a program. It's really just a shifting in our mindset. You made a great point when you said this is good practice. In terms of the evidence of research that's out there, there is evidence and research out there that correlates that sense of belonging and opportunity to closing the achievement gap. More so in terms of being culture responsive, it creates spaces for students' voices to be heard. And so providing them with choice and voice and opportunities to see themselves in the content, in the curriculum, does have a profound impact on their success. And to your point, one thing that you bring up that I think will be rich for me going forward is to also include some links of research in presentations, but I'll be happy to send that to you because I know you said that also you are a teacher, and I think this is something valuable for us to kind of gauge with. So that's something I can add to going forward. But yes, there's plenty of evidence and research out there. Even if you did a search, you'll be able to see the volume of research that's out there to support this pedagogy. And it's an evidence-based practice that is designed to make sure that we're reaching every single learner in the classroom. Okay, so at this time, we did a great job of being over 30 minutes in terms of our questions. Wanted to just say that this is a culturally responsive teaching workshop session that has been recorded. So if you want to go back to it, you're more than welcome to see it. Or if your friend has missed it and would like to join us, these links will be available on the website. I hope that you will join us at our future workshop sessions that we will have. Should you have additional questions or comments and so forth, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I see a hand. Let's take the last one, Maureen.
Hi, yeah, sorry, last minute.
No, it's okay.
What was my question? I'm trying to understand. So the teachers have had this training, right? So, and obviously they're going to be applying it somehow in the classroom. You know, are they going to be, I have a little bit of concern in that, are you going to be having, or some of the teachers have the children take surveys that require them to identify personal things such as these implicit biases that you're talking about? I understand, you know, obviously we want everybody to feel included and all, but I feel like that you start doing that kind of thing and it actually becomes more divisive. And are these types of is that going to be part of the plan in terms of implementing this? Like, how do you know, and how are you going to know the children's culture? Are you going to have them, you know, fill out a survey? I mean, I just don't know how it's going to be visibly applied. So I'm asking.
Okay. So great question, Maureen. Thank you so much for it. What's really important for us to, I think a great takeaway is that when we're in the classroom, we have a culture of students regardless. So the classroom itself is a culture. We have to be mindful of how we respond to the students that are in front of us. And so in terms of that culturally responsive practitioner, they're constantly looking at their students and trying to connect what that student knows to what that new learning is so that there's success in that connection and there's that retention and there's that movement forward. In terms of the questioning that you're asking, we did do a belonging climate survey that asked students about, and there was communication home, about where they felt they stood in terms of that sense of a belonging, feeling appreciated, valued, and so forth. And so our students responded to that. One thing that was incredibly important and insightful is that our students were able to give a wealth of information and show different things that they were experiencing in terms of their lived experiences. And this, again, will be something that we will share at one of our workshops coming up, and that's our Belonging workshop series that will be here. So I do hope that you'll join us. But what I'm looking at here, though, in terms of our students, we are not in lesson planning to assess student biases. We are experts in our content area, in our craft, and in being experts in our field of study or in our content area. We're just mindful of our students, and we learn about our students from asking questions about who they are, their lived experiences. Does this remind you of something? And so those questions are not going to be personal in a sense, like tell me your, secrets or anything, but how is this connected to your life? If we're studying this piece of literature, what in your life is actually connected to this? And students dive in pretty honestly and openly about those connections that they see, and it helps them to really process what they're learning and why they're learning it. It makes sense to them because it has meaning. It has meaning because it connects to them, it resonates with them. So again, we're not assessing students' biases or anything of that nature. What we're doing is making sure that our teachers are receiving professional learning so they can be very mindful and aware of their own biases, because we don't want that to become something that can deter student learning or create barriers. But in terms of our students, we are engaging in the literature, we're engaging in the sciences, we're engaging in the math, and we're doing so through having a culturally responsive mindset, representing our students in the curriculum, making sure we're inclusive of our students, and building upon their strengths. Well, at this point, I'd like to thank you all for attending this evening. I know there was a gorgeous day out there, but you joined me, so I am grateful for that. I also like to extend an invitation for you to always email me, write to me if you have any questions. I know that based on the time that this has come to a close, but should you have additional questions, we'll be able to kind of focus on that at a different time. It's been a pleasure meeting the parents and guardians of Wissahickon School District. I came from Radnor, so this is a great opportunity for me to meet you. I look forward to learning more about you as we continue the work together. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.